So here we are with chapter 6 of CP 6610, and it starts with the case of Jennifer. So let's talk through that for a minute. I'll read it and then we'll talk about it. So Jennifer says, I really need to talk to you. I don't know where to start. I just got my last exam back. It was a disaster, maybe because I haven't been studying. I was up late drinking at a party last night and I almost passed out. I've been sort of going out with a guy for the last month, but that's over as of last night. But what really bothers me is that my mom and dad called last Monday. They're going to separate. I know that they fought a lot, but I never thought it would come to this. I'm thinking of going home, but I'm afraid to. And she continues just talking for the next 3 minutes. In the same way, she repeats herself. She's close to tears, and it's coming so fast you maybe can't get it all. And then she just looks at you. So what is your first statement? And so kind of think about that for a minute. What are you thinking as she's talking? What's your first statement to her? And how do you help her to feel that you've heard her and that you empathize with her? So let's look back at that case to answer some of those questions. And so Jennifer's told us a lot of information, right? We have some choices to make. We could focus on you failed your exam, you're not studying, you're getting drunk, your boyfriend broke up, or your parents are split. How do we as clinicians make that decision of what's most important? Or do we need to make that decision? For most of us as clinicians, we would say we should let the client make that decision in this case. And so we would say something like, wow, seems like you're going through a lot right now. Sounds like you've got a lot going on. Of all those things, where would you like to start? Or you seem overwhelmed, and just wait and let her respond, because it may be more about the emotion than any of the events. So we really want to let our client, Jennifer, guide the discussion from here. Next slide. So we know listening is an active process. It's not passive. And so whether we use attending, encouraging, or paraphrasing, or summarizing, you're very actively involved with your client. And so it means that you have to participate by helping the client to clarify the story, to make it bigger, to enrich it, to get all those details in. Next slide. And so there are several ways that we clarify. One are encouragers. So those are gestures, phrases, and repetition. So just like I gesture when I talk, you're going to gesture when you counsel. You might use a phrase like, oh, right, go ahead, tell me more, right? So those are encouragers. They're just short phrases, nods, expressions to keep the client going, because as the client continues to talk, we're going to gather more information and help them process by hearing their story themselves, helping them process the issue. Paraphrasing is what we use to shorten, clarify, and give feedback to the client's response. And summarizing is helping them to know all that they've said so far. So let's examine those a little bit more in detail. Next slide. Okay. So when we think about the idea of paraphrasing, it's also known as reflection of content. And that's exactly what it is. We're reflecting the content of what we've heard the client say. We're using some of their main words, and we might ask it in a questioning tone of voice. It's different than a simple reflection, which would be, what I hear you saying is, you're feeling angry. If they just said, I feel angry, right? It's different than that in that we're expanding a little more. So if the client said, I'm really depressed right now. I'm worried about my children and how they're coping with the coronavirus, and I don't know what to do, and I think my marriage may be affected. I'm not sure we're going to survive this. I might say, well, so what I'm gathering is that this coronavirus has really stirred up a lot of things for you, including parenting issues, your marriage, and your own emotional life, right? And so I'm kind of giving back what they've said, using some of their own words, right? And so the idea is the client will feel heard, and they'll be able to talk more about what the issue is. Summarizing can be used in several ways. So it's going through all the things we've heard the client say so far and then doing a check-in. It's similar to the idea of paraphrasing, except now it's over a longer period of time, right? And so when we summarize, it might be in the first little bit, right? It might be just in the first few minutes of our counseling session where we say, so far, I've heard you talk about your anger with your spouse, your challenge with your children, and your grief over your mother's death. Is that right? Right? That check-in, is that right? Is giving the client permission to say, nope, you missed something, or no, that wasn't what I meant to say. So it might be over the course of a whole session, and it's a good way to end the session. So in this session today, we've talked about your challenges with your child with ADHD. We've talked about some coping skills that you can use, and we've agreed that between now and the next session, you're going to try Ready, Set, Go to help your child in beginning to regulate themselves. Is that right? So that check-in, is that right? Is that about right? Is helping, again, the client to be able to give us some feedback. Summarizing could also come at the end of several sessions. So throughout our time together, we've talked about a lot of your struggles related to your marriage. And you've used some really good techniques as far as I statements, negotiating, fair fighting, to work on that together. How has that been helpful to you? Okay, so I'm summarizing a whole group of sessions together for the client. Next slide. So let's talk about counseling children for a moment. We're going to post a video of the child's language, of the play therapist's language of change from Dr. Gary Landreth, and that's going to give you a little bit of information about play therapy. So children are not like adults. We use play therapy with children because the language of children is play, and toys are the words of children. So asking a concrete thinking child to tell you about their depression is not going to work at all. If you look online and you Google the case of Andrew from the American Association of Play Therapy, you'll see a short summary of play therapy for clients. Or also, as you think about play therapy, we want to think about how are we using language with children. So if the child says, is this a rocket? We're not going to say, no, those are glasses. We're going to say, it looks like a rocket to you. Because for the child, they're not asking, what is this? They're asking, could this be a rocket? Also, we don't label anything in play therapy until the child labels it. And so if the child's playing with the dolls in the dollhouse and they have a female figure, and I think, wow, it looks like that's the mother, I don't know that because it could be an aunt. It could be themselves. And so I'm going to say, I see you put that one there. Wow, I see how that one went all the way across the room. So I'm just going to comment until the child says, this is the mother or this is me. So the reason that we want to use play therapy are for several reasons. One is that children lack the ability to think abstractly. They lack the ability to understand complex emotions. And it's difficult for them to voice feelings. And so again, play therapy is going to help that. If you're interested in working with children, I suggest you take our play therapy class at Troy. Next slide. When we think about children, there's some ethical issues that we want to consider. We must have an informed consent from both parents in the state of Florida to see a child. For children, we also work with the parent. For me as a play therapist, about 50% of my time is spent with the parent because I'm not going home with that child. And so I really need the parent to have skills to help their child. And I need them to be invested in the therapeutic process. So I need that parental permission. If I'm going to share their information with anyone else, of course, I need that informed consent. Why would I want to share information with someone else? Well, the child's pediatrician might be someone that I might collaborate with, or a social worker, or a teacher. And so I want to get that informed consent so we can talk with each other. For most clinicians, we always get an informed consent for the pediatrician and for the teacher because I know that I'm going to need to work with those two professionals if I'm working with the child. I also want to let the parent know at any time they can withdraw their permission. What about reporting to parents? Do I tell the parent everything their child does in therapy? Generally, no. I give a summary to the parent and hit the high points because I want the child to feel free to talk with me about anything that concerns them and to play out the issues that they have. Of course, if there's a reason why I need to make a report to DCFS, I need to report that. Also with children, sometimes a really great way is to get them to teach their parent what's happened in session. And so if they're teaching their parent this skill, then I'm going to empower the child, because now they're really smart and they know how to do something that mom or dad doesn't know. And then it's going to also help me get the parent to practice that skill as well. With preteens, sometimes it's important to get information to the parent. And so often what I'll do is ask the child, I think this is something that would be really helpful for you to talk with mom or dad about. Why don't we talk about it together with them? And I'll prepare them for, here's how we're going to do it. Because sometimes it's hard for them to bring up difficult topics with their parent. Next slide. So as we think about the idea of counseling, sometimes there might be clients you just don't like. What do you do about that? Do you have to like every client? If you don't like them, do you have to refer them? Not necessarily. So we don't have to like a client to be able to counsel them, but I do have to know that I can work without bias with that client. I need to be aware of what's going on inside me and recognize if that's affecting how I treat them, then I need to make a referral. Next slide. So again, encouraging skills, head nods, positive facial expressions, open gestures, minimal verbals, oh, right? Repeating keywords from the last statement. If they say, it's really hard for me, I might say hard. Silence. So therapeutic silence is really important for us as clinicians. Sometimes we feel like we have to fill up all of the space in the therapy room, right? That we have to keep conversation going. Sometimes the client needs time to process. Let's say that they've just talked to you about a rape and they've never told anyone before. I might need to pause. Maybe the client's crying and all I need to say is, it's okay for you to cry here. I'll just wait for you. And when you're ready, we can move forward. Maybe that they are having difficulty verbalizing something. Maybe they need to think about something I've just said. And so I need to allow that silence for processing for me and the client, because sometimes that is one of the most effective tools that we have. Next slide. When we think about encouragement, key word choices lead the client in a variety of directions. So again, selective attention, I want to be careful that I don't take the client where I want them to go necessarily. I want to be aware of what keywords I focus in on. I don't want to gesture a lot like this all the time, right? Because it's distracting to the client. I don't want to repeat everything they say because that becomes frustrating as well. Too few encouragers, if I'm very stone-faced and I don't move like this, it may make the client very uncomfortable. Next slide. Paraphrasing, again, helps the client, helps us to facilitate their exploration of the issue. I'm going to choose a sentence stem. Like, Joe, I hear you saying that this is very difficult. It feels like the situation is overwhelming right now. I want to use their keywords, their main ideas. I want to briefly get the essence of what they've said, and then I want to check for accuracy. Is that about right? Does it seem the way it is to you? Right? So that I could be wrong, and I give them that permission to say, no, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. Next slide. Summarizing, we've talked about at length. It can be, again, over a period of time. It can be in the first few minutes, the middle, or the end of a session. And it can be at the end of every session. I want to summarize because I want to move the client forward into our session is over now, and here's what we're going to think about for next week. I could also use it to start a session. So last week, we talked about your challenges with your ADHD child and the real difficulty that they were having with social skills. How's that been going since we last met? So it's a way to bring us into the session as well. Next slide. So again, summarizing is like paraphrasing, except it's longer and maybe over the entire interview, or it might be over several sessions. Okay. So you'll see in your book an activity that you can do. Look for that on the screen and work on that activity.